Bokeh effect and bokeh technique. The Japanese were really onto something when they developed this artistic concept. Bokeh actually means blur or haze in their language, and this is what they do in photography. And this kind of photography, or this blurring, has now entered art, and so today we're going to be talking about how to get the bokeh effect in watercolor. So guys, in front of us you can see that I have a paper. I've divided it into 9 parts, and we are going to have a bokeh tutorial on how to make bokeh in 9 ways. Well, actually, we're going to make it in more. So let me label each of the ways, and then we can begin talking about bokeh or blur, blur, blur effects. Okay, I've got these all labeled, and I can't find my waterproof pen, so I was using this, it's a Zeno, and it is not waterproof, so I have to be careful not to get this wet. Okay, that's just an FYI to me and to you if you are going to be using this kind of pen. But I do like it because it's like a natural calligraphy pen. Anyway, okay, so we have lifting, stamping, stenciling, masking, Ecoline ink, gouache. I've done studies on all of these. Water, alcohol, and dark paint with light paint. Okay, we're going to talk about these individually, so let's begin. So I am going to be using 2 colors throughout this painting, and the colors I'm using are the French ultramarine. This is a Daniel Smith, and it is liftable. That means it's not highly staining. I don't want to be demonstrating this with a highly staining ink because that would stain the paper. We wouldn't get a lot of the lifting effects that we would hope to get otherwise. So let me hydrate my paints one more time. I have my handy little squirt bottle for hydrating my paints. It's always nice because then I can activate the colors very quickly to bring them into my painting. Okay, so I'm going to get this French ultramarine. It's a very vibrant blue, and I'm just going to paint it in the background. And you can see it's gradually getting lighter, which is fine. So now I'm going to rinse my brush, and I'm going to bring in, this is a Azo green, and this is M gram. It's a beautiful color. Look at that. And you know, Winsor Newton has a green gold, which is just about the same thing. So I'm going to lift with just the brush, and I find that a square brush or a flat brush works much better than a round brush for this situation. So I now dampen my brush, wipe off the excess, and I'm going to just move my brush in a circle, and I'm going to lift that paint out. And if my hand is in the way, I'm sorry. Okay, so that's the first time, and I can lift more out the second time. Let me show you again. So this is just with one round. And I'll do another one over here. So this is a lighter paint. By the way, both of these are quite liftable. And I can already tell that my paint is drying because it's not lifting as easily. You can see that that first bubble that I did was quite smooth just because the paint was so wet and my brush was quite damp. So I'm just going to do a little bit more. And now I'm going to do, how about a big one? And because it's overlapping, I'll just lift off a little bit more, so that will pop this one a little bit closer, perhaps in the foreground. Okay, I think that's enough. Okay, like I said, it's getting a little harder to lift. Okay, so let's move on. So this is lifting, and this is lifted out twice, and these other ones are basically lifted out one time. This was lifted out twice also. Let's go to the next one, and that is stamping. And I have here, this is a face, I don't know, it's something I found in the makeup department, and so I thought it would be really nice for some painting. So let me grab again my very vibrant French ultramarine, and I'm painting on dry paper. Okay, rinsing my brush once more, bringing in that Winsor & Newton, Getting a nice little blend there. And now this is a dry brush. This is a dry foam pad. It's very soft, very dense actually. Yeah, it's dry. I'm just wiping it off. So that's just staining. Okay, so let's try it. Pressing down, lifting up. So it's very soft. It's quite dense. It's not a sponge per se. It's foam, it's dense, it's for makeup. So let me do a little bit more. Oh, now that's stained. Let me see if I can wipe some of that excess off using just water, my brush water. So let me try over here. Yep. And I pushed kind of in a weird way, and that's how I got the extra ring, but that's cool. So let me show you another way of getting a lifted out part. I can use the back of a pencil eraser because the eraser is flat and it's a little bit softer, but I'm going to try this because it does work if you're very careful. And so my paper's a little bit dry, so let's first try it with dry and then we'll try it with wet. So there's one. It's not as round as I would like, but you got the idea. Yeah. And I'll just do one on top. It's not working anymore. So yeah, so that's how to do the stamping, and you can choose all kinds of designs if you want. The next one is going to be using a stencil. So I have my stencil here. First I need to get my paint on the paper. So very vibrant. I might make that a little more vibrant. Okay. And bringing in my azo green. I need to let this dry. Ooh, that's another kind. That will be the water droplet, okay? So yeah, don't get that one confused with a stencil. Okay, so I'll stencil this out when it has dried. Okay, so if I put it down right now, it will, this will make a pattern on the paper, and that's not what we want. So we'll have to do that when it's dry. So let's go now to the masking. And with masking, we need to have some of this masking liquid. I'm using a Sennelier. I love this. I've never had problems with this Sennelier. So yeah, beautiful brand. And I like it because it has a little bit of a tint, so you can see where you put the masking. Not all of the maskings have that. Some have gray. I've seen one that has kind of a yellowish. I like this color. So normally I don't put a brush directly into the masking, but this is an acrylic fiber brush, so I guess it's okay. I don't really like to do that because it messes up my brush. Now, I would never put hair fibers into the masking because that would make a disaster. Yeah, if I used a larger brush, I'm going to use a larger brush. So much easier. I'm going to get it damp a little bit on the end first. Oh yes, look at that. Now we'll get effects a lot faster. So I'm just going to bring in a few areas. Now this one I'm not going to mask all the way. You can see that I didn't put masking completely down. I did swipe it, but I do know that with that thin layer, there's going to be leaking through my masking, and I just want to show you what that does. And this is really thick, so that will be masked out just fine. And now I'm just going to do some little dots here and there. Okay, they take longer to dry, but if it takes too long, I'll just use the hair dryer on them. Okay, so that's an idea for your using the masking. And we'll have to let that perfectly dry before we put our watercolor or any kind of water on top. Otherwise, we will have a mess. And it will mess up your brushes if you put your brush onto that when it's not yet dry. Okay, so now let's go to the Ecoline. I love this stuff. I use this all the time. It's one of my favorite tools in watercolor for getting back white. So now I'm going to get a very generous amount of that French ultramarine, Ooh, yes, look how generous that is, because I want to show you how dramatic this white can be. And I'm a little bit more generous this time. I will be more generous also with the gouache because I want you to see a lot of effects when it's really wet. So this has a little stopper, so you can see I'm dropping in. Now this is in really, really wet. So I'll show you in the different, amounts of water. So it's a little bit drier. Okay, I'm going to do just a couple more little droplets. Obviously on the right side it's much wetter than on the left. Okay, so now what I want to show you with this one, get my little nail brush, a little bit damp on the tips, and I want to paint out a little bit just so you can see the textures when it's painted out also. So you can see that it covers really well, it doesn't bleed out a whole lot. If you want to know more about this, I have done several videos with Ecoline, but the really showcasing one is when I compare the Ecoline and the gouache, and I painted an alpaca, and I will link it right up there in the corner, so if you would like to watch, you may. Okay, so that's what it looks like, and I'm going to take this one, paint it out a little bit. I liked that effect around it. So you can see that it doesn't really bleed out, and when it does, I want to show you, when it does, it has a kind of a curdling effect. So let's look at that. You can see that right here, there's kind of a weird curdling effect around the edge. That's only in the wet, in very, very wet. So I kind of like that. It's very unique. Ink bleed, I guess that's what I should call it. And I'm going to show you one other thing. If I paint one on top, so this is a little bit drier, right? So now I can have a background bokeh effect and one that's closer, because this one is not moving so much in the paint, so it's going to be brighter. So that's a way to get bokeh effect with different colors of white. You can see that the ink doesn't pick up as much of the background when it is on a drier background. Okay, for the next category, I have gouache. And I do want to point out that there are 3 kinds of gouache for Holbein. 3! Okay, so the one that I usually use is the permanent white. Although it looks like I've used the primer. I used to use the primer until I discovered the permanent. Honestly, I don't really know the big difference, but I do know with zinc white you're getting a little bit more of a transparency. So I think I will put a little bit of the permanent white here, a little of the zinc white, and a little of the primary white. It's not going to be really telltale because there's not enough data here, but like I said, if you want to watch that video on how to paint the alpaca, then that will showcase the big differences between the Ecoline ink and the permanent white gouache, and then I mentioned the zinc white. I don't talk about the primary white, but that would be for you to have as information. My palette is a little bit dirty. I apologize for that. I forgot to wash it. And this was the last time I was using the gouache earlier today. So this is going to be my permanent white. This will be the zinc white. I don't need this much because of the amount that I'll be working in, but I'll show you. And this one is a little bit harder because I've had it longer. And this is my primary white. Now again, you don't want to be using your hair fiber brushes with this stuff. So I'm going to be mixing it out with, I like the small flat brush. It's a little bit natty and it will work perfectly for our purposes right now. Okay, this next process I'm going to speed up a little bit just because it takes quite a bit of time. So I'm using the 3 gouaches, and first of all I need to hydrate them so that after I put the paints down I can quickly drop in those gouaches wet into wet. I'm also making sure that they are the same consistency as the Ecoline ink, just because I want this test to be systematic. Now I did run into one little tiny pitfall, because when I put down the permanent gouache, everything was really wet at that time, but you know, my room is quite warm, and by the time I put in the primary gouache, the bleed out of the chalk, which is in the gouache, wasn't dispersing that much. And so there seems to be an inconsistency between the permanent and the primary, but really, technically, they should be the same. And a really odd comment about the three gouaches. As I was blending them out initially on that little palette, I could almost feel a difference. So the zinc white felt a little bit chalkier, and oddly enough, the primary felt pretty smooth. It was a harder paint. I've had it longer. I don't know, but this is just my impression, and maybe that did affect some of the bleed out. I don't know. This is something I do want to experiment more with. But like I said, I do have a video link so you can watch about, you know, the basic differences between the ink and the gouache. Okay, the next one is with water droplets. We're going to go in and we're going to grab a really healthy amount of our French ultramarine, spread that out, and coming in with our azo green. And now we're just going to take our brush, and I'm just going to use a large brush first and drop in. Ooh, you can see that's a pretty healthy. Okay, so these are water droplets. And I'm going to let that dry a little bit more. Technically, you should have wet on wet, you're going to get some effect, but wet on damp, you'll get the best effects because it's already settled into the paper. So I actually was a little bit premature with this, so let's just wait and we will do that again. Okay, so the next one is going to be our alcohol. And let me just show you what alcohol I'm using. This is isopropyl rubbing alcohol. It is 91%. It is incredibly powerful. Keep it away from your nose. Definitely keep it away from your children, your pets, everything. Okay, so sometimes people do use this in their art. If you do use it for maybe repelling some of your pigments on your paper, for cleaning, whatever, protect your nose. And also do realize that this is not archival. It will mess with the archivalness of your painting. So by us putting it on our paper, we're going to mess with how archival this paper is going to be. Okay, so now we're going to be using a little bit of this alcohol to repel some of the pigments on our paper. And there are different levels of isopropyl. This one is really powerful. Like I said, keep it away from your pets and your children. Ooh, that stuff smells bad. Okay, so let's let these paints settle into the paper and let's hop back to the water droplets and the spatter effect and finish on that. So yes, I am touching in with my small brush little droplets of water. Sometimes I do touch the canvas and that could make a difference on the textures, just FYI. But yeah, you can see that the textures are quite nice. And it's at the area where the pigments have settled into the paper and now are being pushed by the water. And that's how we're getting a kind of diffused pattern on our paper. And of course, we'll try a spatter, which is just probably a finer reworking of the pigments. And in our next section, because we have alcohol, does the alcohol affect the pigments the same as the water? Well, here it is. Archival or not, I'm really loving this kind of a texture. It's kind of like raindrops within raindrops. So I'm going to try an overlap of the pattern just to see if I can create kind of a raindrop ripple effect. And I am liking how it kind of looks in the green as opposed to the blue. It seems more vibrant in the green. So it seems like some colors are more interactive in this style. So I'm going to try a smaller brush and see if I'm getting different kinds of texturing or if it's going to be the same size. Just kind of interesting. And I have to say, I'm loving this one. It's like raindrops and raindrops and raindrops. So if ever I want to paint a raindrop scene, this is the kind of bokeh effect that I will use for that kind of painting. Okay, we're about ready to do number 9, but before we do that, let's go back to the masking. As you can see, the masking fluid has already dried, so let's put in the blue and the green. And while those paints are drying, we can be working on the final one, and that's to paint dark paint around the lighter paint to get a bokeh effect. Now, among all of the bokeh effects, this one is considered the hardest. It takes the most time, it takes a lot more control, and so we saved it for the last. So the methodology here is to put down circles of a lighter color on the paper, and then while those circles of paint are still quite damp, we're going to put in a darker color around them. And gradually we're going to narrow that space between the darker color and the lighter color until those colors are tangent and slightly mixing. It is very possible that the blue in this instance is going to bleed into the yellow or that green. And it did happen with me also. We can do a lifting to lift out some of those color bleeds, or we can use a gouache later, which I also did, to clean up some of those edges. But this is a way of getting the bokeh effect. It takes a lot more time and control because we need to be very careful of when we touch the darker color and the lighter color. If we don't touch them in this wet and wet process, then we're going to have hard lines and it's going to be like a sticker on the paper, and we don't want stickers. We want to have paint. So this is the first layer. You can see later I brought in a second layer, and this is when I introduced the magenta, just because I wanted you to see how other colors could be built up. So when I brought in the magenta for that second layer, I am doing negative painting. So I'm painting little circles or, round spaces on the paper, and I'm painting around those round spaces. It's like I'm doing a stencil work without having a stencil, and that is going to create another kind of bokeh effect. So I have the yellow, and then I have a brighter blue showing between that magenta. And so this is a really nice way of creating bokeh. It just takes a lot of time. It's a little bit messier, and so it's something that people don't really use that much, but it is an option for another bokeh effect. Okay, so we have now painted all 9 of the backgrounds for the bokeh effect, but we're not quite done because we have to finalize on the stenciling and the masking. So going up to the stenciling, we can create 2 bokehs now that our background is dry. So we're going to get 2 bokeh effects. One is by subtracting color and another is by adding color. So with the subtraction, I can put down my stencil, hold it very, very firmly, and then with a wet brush, I can drag that brush around and around in the circle, then lift that stencil off, tap up that water or that wet pool of paint that I've lifted, maybe do this 2 or 3 times, and I will create a round circle, which makes a beautiful, well-controlled bokeh effect. Now on the other hand, I can use that stencil and I can add in paint. And with this I can add in gouache or paint, but I'm painting within the confines of that stencil. And this time by adding in paint, I am doing an addition, which means that the color is going to be brighter than when I did the subtraction of the color with the lifting process. So these are 2 other ways of getting the bokeh effect. Okay, so let's talk about that masking. And you guys, I have a huge confession to make. It slipped my mind that this is the Canson Heritage watercolor paper that I did a review on a few months ago, and I found that I could not get the masking out of the paper once I put it on. And so here I'm trying to show you about bokeh effect, and yet I can't get the masking out of the paper. So what I want you to imagine is this is the paper, we have removed the masking, and now you are back to the pearly white color of the paper with these dark blues and the greens around it, and it's perfect. So this is what masking usually does. Just FYI, Canson Heritage does like the masking, as in it likes to eat it. And if you would like to have a review on that, I will put it up in the notes above and you can check it out. So guys, you now have the power of bokeh effect at your fingertips. You have 9 creative ways of creating bokeh. Actually, I gave you 13. But anyway, I hope you enjoy your watercolor painting. I hope you can incorporate bokeh effect into your painting. And guys, I also hope to see you again.